In this next segment of our discussion of radio and its promises, we're going to start by talking about political and news broadcasting. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was president during the Great Depression in the United States. He began what came to be called fireside chats. And the reason they were called that is that Americans literally would gather around their radios to listen to the president talk to them. He had a very comforting voice. He was called a wise and kindly father who sat down to talk sympathetically with his children about crises that were happening. He truly was a comforting political voice. Unfortunately, there were some misuses of radio when people started to run against Roosevelt for his many runs at president. He held the office for 4 terms. One of the incidents was with U.S. Senator Vandenberg, who recorded a fake debate, so himself talking, and then he would use recordings of FDR in responses. Yes, these deceitful ways that politicians are using today is nothing new. Some CBS affiliates refused to air the program. So political radio came of age during the last segment or the last run that FDR had for office. In 1944, the networks dropped their regular programming so that they could provide continuous election coverage and analysis. And of course, we have that same pattern today. Now, when it comes to radio news, it's an interesting thing. We see a pattern that develops throughout the 20th century. With the introduction of each new medium, old media get very concerned and try to fight back. Well, that's what newspapers did against radio. They really feared radio news. They controlled the wire services. Radio was getting their news from the wire services. The news service pressured the wire services to stop. So we're talking about the Associated Press and United Press and International News Service. This got to be such a problem that finally they came together in 1933 at the Biltmore Hotel in New York and put together an agreement between newspapers and radio. It limited broadcast news to 2 15-minute segments a day, but the agreement was put aside within a year. Radio recognized that news had a great potential for them, and so they started developing their own news sources. World War II caught the radio industry by surprise. As your author says, there was no manual on how to use radio for war. So some of the best and most impressive journalists and journalistic teams came about during World War II. The leader of these great reporters was a gentleman named Edward R. Murrow. He worked for CBS, and on William Paley's orders, he put together the greatest news team in the history to cover the war. Murrow had a program, a nightly program between 1939 and 1941 called This is London. And so he was able to report to the United States what was going on in Europe as the war was progressing there and as the United States was edging up to war, which began, of course, in the US in 1941. The Office of War Information coordinated propaganda and information services. Yes, it was propaganda. The effort was to get people willing to support the war, to get recruits willing to fight in the war, and to get people to be willing to do things like rations and so forth. There was an Office of Censorship that issued voluntary guidelines. People like Murrow and other journalists objected to it, but no one deliberately violated it, recognizing that there could in fact be information that the enemy could use. So even when journalists knew about the atomic bomb coming, they did not go ahead and give that information out. In the next and last segment, we're going to talk about the regulation of radio broadcasting.